Governor Chuck Robb, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be able to join you.
Governor, what an incredible story you have had that you have shared in your book that I thoroughly enjoyed reading, In the Arena, a Memoir of Love, War, and Politics, with many magnificent pictures that speak volumes by themselves. So I would first love to start out with your upbringing in Arizona. What was your upbringing like?
Well, obviously, that was early in my life. I don't have a very vivid recollection of everything that took place or all of the conversations that took place or even all of the little friends that I would have had at that particular point in my life. But my father had been very active in in a number of things, and he started out in the aviation industry. He became a pilot, and he was stationed in Arizona. He'd actually homesteaded at one point in Arizona, and then became a pilot. Then wanted to get into the dude ranching business later on. We were living in Phoenix while he was on the executive side of the administrative side of the American. He was actually flying. I don't think this is actually in the book, so no one will know what Ludington Airlines was. He was a pilot for Ludington Airlines initially, and he talked about flying into Washington, D.C., which was located at that point where the Pentagon is now located, and they would have to call ahead and cause them to turn the traffic lights so that they could stop the traffic on Route 1, which ran right through the middle of what was then the landing area. So he had an interesting time early on in aviation, but I was not a part of that really. I was born in Arizona. My father and mother were living there at that time. They were living in Phoenix, which is why I have a Phoenix address rather than a Virginia address. They were both born on this coast, so on the East Coast. My mother was actually born in Virginia. My father was born in what was Virginia before it became West Virginia. So they were in at least a geographical area that was quite removed from where I ended up being born. I have fairly deep roots in this part of the country where I'm currently located. Used to have a house here before it burned down, but in any event, I graduated from Mount Vernon High School, which is just down the road from where I was then living and was living before the house burned down. In any event, so I have, in addition to my own Virginia roots and my experience both as governor and then in the Senate, all of that experience has been gained basically being in Virginia or from Virginia, and clearly relates to the Marine Corps, which was a pivotal part of my early life, and helped shape what I did in the rest of my life, I guess.
Yeah, so Governor, in University of Wisconsin, you were in the NROTC. Why did you join the Marines after that?
Well, I will tell you that I always had a great admiration for what the Marines stood for, what they had done. I didn't do any of most of their historical legacy, but I inherited all that. I wanted to inherit, I guess. I wanted to be with the first to fight. And it was, I'm not denigrating or taking down or taking a shot at any of the other services. They're all great. But the Marines had a reputation for being the ones to go in there first and get the fighting, the tough fighting out of the way. And I wanted to be part of that reputation. And you could inherit it if you worked hard at being a Marine. In my case, I was already destined to be a Marine officer. And the NROTC, the Marines can only take 1/6 of each graduating class. It's the same percentage that they can take from the Naval Academy, incidentally. I think it's still the same. In any event, you had to be reasonably successful to make sure that you could be in the top part of your NROTC class in order to be able to select the Marine option. And the challenge that brought with us, both OCS, which was then called Training and Test Regiment, was later renamed OCS, but it's basically the same thing as boot camp that you do at either Parris Island or out on the West Coast. In any event, that was a challenge. And I like challenges. I've always liked challenges. And it clearly marked me for the rest of my life. Linda sometimes used to kid me. She said, you basically married the Marine Corps. And I was well involved in the Marine Corps by the time we met or when we married. She said, I'm just your mistress.
Once a Marine.
What's a Marine, always a Marine. That's right.
Yes, once a Marine, always a Marine. And you actually graduated at basic school with honor, which is why you also got assigned to the White House as a military social aid governor. What was that initial experience as a social aid like?
Well, it was very interesting. You're actually each of the services nominate several eligible young men in most cases. Now it's both men and women, and I think they may take folks that are married at this point. But it was at that point all of the social aides were single, and so they were eligible, and you had a chance to engage in all of the functions that the White House takes care of. And in my case, I was also assigned the additional duty of being the officer in charge of the White House Color Guard. So whenever we had a state dinner, we would march in. I would go up with the Color Guard and go into the, in almost all cases, into the yellow room and salute the president and the visiting head of state, whoever it was, and request permission to withdraw the colors. And that they would follow me and the colors down the grand staircase and into the east room in the White House, which is where the receptions in most cases took place. But my duty in most of those cases, if I didn't lead the color guard in most cases, I would already be standing with the president and introducing all of the people that came through the line. They're an aide that would be setting them up, so to speak, would ask each person to give me their name, rank, and whatever else, whatever honorific they might have, and that was to make sure that the president never was confronted with somebody that he knew well and suddenly forgot their name or forgot their title. And so I would repeat it, and that way the president could always acknowledge the person that was coming through the line, and the conversation would flow naturally rather than having some attempt to remember what it was they wanted to talk to that person about.
So, Governor, all those opportunities to stand next to Lyndon Johnson, who was a master politician and was eventually able to get the civil rights legislation passed, you must have gotten an inside look into politics. What were some of the things you learned early on about what it took to be such a master politician as the President Lyndon Johnson was?
Well, let me say, I didn't start to be a, quote, master politician. I wanted to be a good politician. I wanted to be a good leader. I wanted to have the respect of the folks that I'm working with. I always thought that one of the most important aspects of any relationship where you're in a leadership responsibility is you have to have the respect of those you want to lead. They have to respect you, particularly in the military or in the warfighting aspects of the military. If you're going to ask all of the men who are for whom you're responsible, and you're responsible for their direction, with the officers and NCOs that are below you through which you would make your orders known to the troops that you're leading. They have to know that you understand what it is they're going through, and that you have the ability to directly impact life or death for them. And they have the ability to provide life or death protection for you. And so you're mutually dependent on each other, and you have to respect each other. And that's a very important element I've found in leadership at any level. Doesn't have to be the military. If people know that you're a man or a woman of your word, and that you're not going to deliberately mislead them or give them information or order that is improper, you can get a whole lot done. If people were suspect, I'm not going to cite recent examples or whatever, that people might not have been as willing to take a chance. But in any event, you have to believe in the person who is subjecting you to, particularly in a combat situation, to life or death situation, almost around the clock, really around the clock, because you're out there in the field fighting. You're not stopping for a break at a heavily guarded institution or whatever the case may be, or wherever else you might live. You're out there, and you and everybody else are responsible for everybody else who's out there. They have to know you have their back, and it's something that every now and then there are people that get in a position of leadership, or should recognize it, may get a little carried away with their powers, and forget that they're actually serving everybody who is responding to their leadership. Governor, it's a fairly simple, straightforward lesson. There's nothing particularly sophisticated or anything else about it. It's just trust.
Governor, you also in the book mentioned balancing that with the need for leaders to have humility. Yeah. So how were you able to balance that?
Well, you try to not get too excited about who you happen to be at the moment, whatever your rank or position happens to be, and to try to understand the feelings of the people whose lives you are affecting, either directly or indirectly in some cases. If it looks like you're getting too big for your boots, you're not going to be as effective.
So while you were at the White House serving as the military social aide, you met Linda, and you mentioned in the book she was out of my league. So how were you able to woo Linda? Well,
let me say that Linda is a very outgoing. She's very, first of all, she's very smart, and she's wise in the ways of the world, and she was kind enough to ask me to be her escort to a number of official functions. I mean, I was a typical bachelor in the Washington area at the time. I was dating a number of very appealing young women, but she would frequently be asked in her capacity as the first daughter of the President of the United States to come to an event. She might be a sponsor or whatever the case may be, but she was expected to have an escort. So she frequently asked me to be her escort to official events. So I became very comfortable with her early on, and we developed a mutual respect and a mutual appreciation for our joint activities. We just liked being together, and I do talk about this in the book. Linda went with a bibliophile, a collector of children's books and whatever, over to England, and coming back, I realized how much I missed her. Just as she's getting ready to leave, we're in the White House, and she's whispering to me, "We've got to talk when we get back." When I get back, and I thought, "Whoa, you've been missing something." In any event, it led from there, and we had dinner within 2 or 3 days after we got back, where it's the first time that we had been invited to come as a couple to an event. The then curator of the White House had a little dinner party for 2 or 3 couples, and we were both invited to the same party. Sometimes I would be invited to parties and take Linda, and Linda would sometimes be invited to parties and take me. But that's the first time we went as a couple. We came back we went up to the solarium in the White House, which is where we did a lot of our long-term talking, thinking, whatever. And over a course of 2 or 3 hours, I guess it was, we both just decided to get married. It wasn't the usual, as I've had with our daughters, when they have decided that it's time or they're in a mood that it's time to say yes, they would frequently come to me, and or the young man that was proposing marriage to them would come to me with the whole spiel that you kind of expect the courting son to become son-in-law to go through. I didn't go through any of that, but we did later on, after I got a ring and I could get down on my knee and offer to her. But I have 2 sons-in-law, or one I know, because he actually filmed the whole routine of him getting down on his knee to present the ring that he was offering to our then youngest daughter, in whose home I am now staying, since we don't have a home after the fire. In any event, he has it all on tape. He's a very good photographer as well, so he's got that moment frozen in time to enjoy. And they have 2 of the cutest little boys you'll ever see. And when they get old enough to decide that they want to find a life partner, he can share that with them. All I can share is the story that you and I just went through.
It's a great story. And you also, as a part of this, Governor, had to ask the President of the United States for his daughter's hand in marriage. How were you able to do that?
Well, fortunately, because I had been standing next to him for a long period of time, and he knew me, but he didn't really know me yet. He trusted my judgment, I think. I'm sure that the way they vet people for White House duty or whatever, that he had a pretty good idea that I had been quite successful so far in the Marine Corps. But in any event, I requested of his secretary a very short personal visit. And that was arranged, it happened to be in the Lincoln sitting room, or the Lincoln bedroom. And I got there just ahead of him. And he came in the door, and the first thing I said, "Mr. President, I suspect that you know why I have asked for this meeting." And he gave a very warm shake of his head, and said, "Yes, I think I do." And it was I knew it was going to be a very pleasant experience. And by the time I got around to actually formally asking for the hand of his eldest daughter in marriage, and he says, "You have it." And then he followed up, "And my love." And I thought, "My, this is the most powerful man in the world at this point, and he's using the word love in there." And I thought, wow. But there's an interesting story, which is also in the book for those people who might be interested, how Linda, on the night that we actually decided to get married on our own, without asking our parents, either way, she went in to tell her mother. And she her mother and father were in a big bed, and she went over to try to get her mother's hand to get her attention so she could talk to her. And at that point, her father woke up and gave this, "Oh, don't you even want to talk to me?" And so at that point, she said she got in bed with both of them, shared the whole thing. And then the next morning, it was about the next morning, I guess now, I had to head back to Marine Barracks, 8th and I Streets, Washington, D.C., where I was stationed for that period of 3 years. And that's all in the book, too, for the people that are interested in those little details. In any event, it was, and I'd sent some flowers because I wasn't really planning to get engaged that night, but maybe if I examine my conscience in full, I might have been thinking about it. Obviously, I was thinking about it while she was gone. I had gotten much more serious about her. In any event, I wanted to send some flowers, so I sent a dozen red roses, and they were inadvertently delivered to her mother. And you've read that in the book.
Yeah.
And she said, "No, those are mine. Those are mine." And her mother very graciously turned them over. Her mother understood completely.
That's a magnificent story, and your sense of humor, Governor, also comes across in the book. And after that, you had a beautiful wedding in the White House. One of my favorite pictures, also as a father of two girls, is Linda putting her head on her father's
Yes,
shoulder at the wedding.
I wanted to, well, actually, that was the wedding day. The one I think that we used was the one it was rehearsal the day before. And she'd be coming down the grand staircase. I think that's where if I recall, it was the picture taken. And I thought that's perfect. And I wanted to show the love between father and daughter, because in effect, the father in that case is giving up sole proprietorship, so to speak, of the daughter, or that he and his wife had of their daughter, and bringing another man, another human being into this relationship. And it's obviously very special. And it's in the 54 plus years that Linda and I have been in this relationship. It's clearly the best thing that ever happened to me.
That is outstanding
She
to
always
hear.
says the first decision you made to join the Marine Corps, and this one, in terms of my purely personal life, was clearly the best decision I ever made, and I hope that she always feels it's the best decision she ever made. Since
So
the two of us did it without any prompting from anybody but our own hearts.
you made this great decision. You got married to Linda. The commander in chief is your father-in-law. You have already served the required time in the Marines, but you still ask to be assigned to go to Vietnam, Governor.
Right. Let me just say, but because I was fortunate enough to end up, you make a reference to it, I wasn't going to brag about it. Excuse me, but because I was fortunate enough to end up first in my class, I felt I had, and the Marine Corps had honored me by giving me a Mameluke sword with my name and everything engraved on it as the number one graduate of the class. I felt that I had an obligation to prove myself, or prove to the Marine Corps, prove to myself really, that I was as good as they seemed to have think I was, based on the evaluation they'd made. Fortunately, all of that took place before I ever even met Linda, or before I ever met her father. So there was no concern afterwards that I was either said any of those things that would have happened. All of that, what I call very plush duty, I thought was the Marine Corps' desire to reward me for the accomplishment that took place there in a non-combat situation. I felt if I ever left active duty without having actually served with the Muddy Boots Marines in combat, that I was shortchanging the Marine Corps and myself. I know too many people in the political process who had, I thought, very exciting career possibilities. Every now and then I'd run into somebody, I'm not going to name any names at this point, who would confide with me, said, I don't think I'm ever going to get where I wanted to go in politics because I didn't go to Vietnam. I didn't serve. And it's just one of those things that, but I didn't have that doubt. I didn't want to have that doubt. So it was very important that I do. And there was, and I cover this in the book, but I don't name the person, somebody that was high up in Linda's father's administration, took me aside after this. I don't remember the exact time frame, but wanted to talk to me and said, now you've already fulfilled your obligation in terms of active duty service with the Marine Corps. You take your commission as a regular officer. And I that was already complete. It said, you don't have to go to Vietnam. You can resign your commission right now, or very shortly or whatever, and you can walk away in effect honorably from serving. And I said, I can't do that. I mean, I got to live with myself too. And so it was important to me to be able to go. And what I wanted to do, and I was fortunate enough eventually to get this, I wanted to command an infantry company in combat in Vietnam. That was the only war that was going on at the time. And in any event, it was something I felt compelled to do, and would have felt a complete erosion of public confidence and morale, I'm sure, if I had not done it. If I had taken what others assume was the easy way out. Now, I didn't realize at the time that by being right up front about wanting to serve, even before we were married, that I was making it difficult for another son-in-law at the time. And I regretted that, but I should have been thinking about the contrasting images that were at play. In any event, it was for me very important that I do it. And I'm, again, it's one of those things you're just really glad you made what you considered the right decision at the time. Throughout the political process, I'm always pleased, particularly when you're taking a position which seems to be politically unpopular at the time, if you've taken the position that history will look on it with favor. You're always pleased that you made the decision that probably wasn't understood, because you knew that it was politically unpopular to do that. And some of those are alluded to in the book. But in any event, you never get in serious trouble if you do what you believe in your heart, in your mind, is the right thing to do under the circumstance. I mean, that sounds almost sanctimonious, but I mean, it's a good lesson in life. I pass it on frequently. I used to get consulted frequently by other office holders, and they had an unpopular issue to deal with. And I would say, if you believe in your heart of hearts, in your conscience, that you're doing the right thing, even though it's politically unpopular, make that decision and explain why you made the decision. People, I think, will understand. They'll give you credit for making a tough decision. And that was always my case. I always benefited ultimately from making tough decisions that were required. I thought as a part of your leadership, you've got to stand up for what you believe in. I'm trying not to sound like I'm bragging or sanctimonious. It's just a lesson of life that's worth learning. And I'll pass it on to anyone who's open.
Yeah, that's part of the respect and leadership that you were talking about earlier, Governor, also. And while serving in Vietnam, you also earned the Bronze Star. And both your descriptions, and there is a picture in the book of tapes you used to send back to Linda that she had shared with her father. There's a picture of LBJ listening to the tapes with his head down on his fist.
Okay, that really isn't a photograph. That he had listened to a tape recording that I had sent to Linda, not believing that he would ever hear it. So I was fairly candid, but I always tried not to make it sound too gruesome. If I was describing casualties, I wouldn't really describe exactly what they looked like or exactly how their bodies were misshapen because of whatever action they'd been through. I would try to keep that, but I would talk about various aspects that I could share. And her father apparently had started, I guess, asking her to share my letters with her. And then when we had a tape recorder. Incidentally, the tape recorder was presented to me by her father. A similar tape recorder was presented to Linda when I left for Vietnam. and that was to enhance our communications. The actual tape, because it was very hot in Vietnam, it tends to stretch out a little bit, and you get very slow. But the White House, they call them the WACA, the White House audio group, was able to put it back speedwise, and he played it for his cabinet just before that photograph was taken, and he's still in there thinking about it. And he actually took very seriously all of the lives that were lost in war and in battle. He had not actually, he had served during World War II, but he had not been in combat as such. And he had a real appreciation for what the families of those, in most cases, men, now more and more women, and I have great pride in the women who want to serve. I think that's great if they'd like to, and we shouldn't take undue advantage of that. But let's not hold them back from achieving their aspirations. So I'm willing to share that honor with those who'd like to share it. In any event, he was listening to a description. In this case, I think it was, if I recall correctly, I was describing a midnight evacuation of one of my men who had been, can't remember whether I described this in the book or not, but who had fallen. We were going through the mountains that are all, it was pitch black. He had fallen. It was a little waterfall. He had ended up broken his leg, and we had to evacuate him by dropping a basket from a helicopter all the way down through the jungle, and then securing him in there, and then they reel it back up and take him and get him patched up. But it was the description of exactly what was happening, and I may have had a description on that tape, I don't remember, of some other action we had when we're actually engaged, when you're talking about the enemy, and you're talking about if you have killed enemy troops, you'll almost always immediately search them for documents or other vehicles. I mean, not vehicles, other indications of planning that can be useful in the whole greater intelligence field. But sometimes you would talk about the fact that frequently, particularly those who are conscripts from the other side, may be serving against their first choice of career in life. And in their backpack, they may have pictures of family, wives in some cases, that are really very much like the pictures you're carrying yourself. And so he had enormous respect for the enemy loss of life, as he did for loss of life for our own troops. Now, that's not always appreciated by people who are in a combat situation. And sometimes more reporting gets done of those who prance on the victim in a way that distorts the beliefs of all of those who are in combat. I was always, again, I won't go into any detail on My Lai, but that was always a sharp black mark against military service, I thought, at the time, because you don't take advantage of women and children and just slaughter them.
And vast
you don't do that with your troops, even if they're your prisoners. You don't do that to them. But you don't do that because they're easy targets. In any event, it was that type of thing, that type of understanding, which I'm not sure was always fully understood about Lyndon B. Johnson, because he had the duty of accepting responsibility for, in effect, every loss of life on both sides, because he has ordered those troops into combat.
So vast majority served with honor, as you did, Governor. I wonder
Absolutely.
how did that experience shape you as a person?
Well, it's obviously leaves a deep impression. I mean, people believe what they're doing for their country. And ultimately, it boils down to, for the man on the left and the man on the right, they're each responsible for each other's lives. And those are the ones that they bond closest to, but they recognize they're doing it for their country, and they believe that they're doing what everybody else is doing for their country. So it's not just an act of liking a combat environment. There are some people that don't fare as well if they have been in intense combat over an extended period of time. When they come back into a peaceful environment, they don't adapt as well. In most cases, can make the switch back to the friends and family and not have a tough time.
So you came back and you switched back. Why choose to run for lieutenant governor in 1977 when you had no political experience?
Well, in the interim, after Vietnam, the first thing first of all, I came back. I was head of the principal officer recruiting program for the Marine Corps for a period of, I'm just sort of guessing now, a year and a half, whatever it was. It may have been up to 2 years, I've forgotten. In any event, this particular program recruited more Marine Corps officers than either the Naval Academy or the NROTC program for which I had come. Everybody was recruited as a civilian on college campuses and then went to OCS and were commissioned as we were at when they graduated from whatever institution they were in. But I was doing that for that period of time. What was the question? I'm sorry.
So what made you decide to run for political office?
I came back with the point I was going to make is after I had been in this position for a while, I decided on the basis of comments and advice from a lot of friends that said, you ought to go to law school. And I had always sort of planned to come back and go get an MBA, the Master of Business Administration. But enough of them convinced me that it would be a very useful tool in my packet to be able to have a law degree, and said you will never have to be put in a position where somebody say you don't understand. I'm a lawyer. Said, you'll be a lawyer too. They won't be able to use that. And one of our daughter, our middle daughter, actually is a very good practicing lawyer right now, and it's a First Amendment lawyer. It's someone in the media you would appreciate, and has all kinds of very interesting clients that every now and then she'll tell me somebody that she is representing, whatever the case may be. In any event, it was important to me, so I went back to law school. So suddenly I have a whole new qualification, I guess, for public. And I had found, because I had come back and with the head of the they call it the platoon leaders class PLC program, but it was at least the largest source of brand new second lieutenants in the Marine Corps. And I was frequently called upon to either react or give speeches, and did in both cases, or had at least one event that turned out to be quite memorable in Philadelphia, it turns out. And I went up there to visit with the officers, the OSOs, the officer selection officer there, and they asked me to put on an event. And lots of people, it was in the height of the anti-war period. And so the audience, or the auditorium in which it was held, was just filled with people with all kinds of anti-war paraphernalia and signs and whatever. And it was a difficult audience. But the very fact that I could get them to laugh, to chuckle at something, and then I could take them head on issues and earn their respect. Go back to that word. And at the end, they gave me a standing ovation. They'd come there to see me completely pulled apart every limb out of my body, but came away with a different approach. I don't know, and I say this in the book, I don't know that I changed that many minds on the war, but I think I changed that many minds on whether everyone who served their country was necessarily a war criminal.
So you built on
Any event that can give you a certain experience that you have the ability to deal with difficult issues and win over people on the basis of words and example. And so I was increasingly intrigued by the political process. I hadn't gone into either the Marine Corps or the law school specifically to get into politics, but I realized I had a brand new credential that I knew I had something of value, and there are things that I could do that I might not have thought about. And I for a variety of reasons, Virginia offered a very appealing opportunity for someone who wanted to correct some wrongs from the past, but respect the people going forward. And it was in a period that was just really at the end of Reconstruction, and Jim Crow was still very much alive in terms of the way the country and a whole lot of the country treated those who had been mistreated during the entire slavery experience. And I could see that I had a real opportunity to change minds. And so that's how I went into government. I didn't want to start out running for governor, the very first elective office, but I thought lieutenant governor will give me an opportunity to prove my bona fides in a political office. You end up, it was an office to be the president of the Senate and lieutenant governor. And as lieutenant governor, you're next in line for succession, like the vice president of the United States, should you have to accede to that office under other circumstances. Fortunately, that didn't happen. I was able to do it, and then I was able to run for office, but I ran for office knowing that would be good preparation and would again establish a stronger argument that I can handle the responsibilities of government and the pressures of government before I went for the top job.
And you did in 1982 get elected governor of Virginia. And as you also mentioned in the book, you served both as lieutenant governor and eventually as governor in transitioning Virginia from what had existed for a long time with the capital of Confederacy, with the Jim Crow laws, to a more modern Virginia.
Absolutely. That was my objective at that point. I mean, I thought that was not so far out of reach that it couldn't be done. But I thought we still had to acknowledge that we had been very much the focus of much of what was then wrong with society in general. And the capital of all of that effort had been in Richmond, Virginia. And so I thought we had a responsibility, and I thought there were enough people that wanted to get beyond that wouldn't sort of live in that past and try to perpetuate a very unequal society, that we could make real progress. And I like to think that most people making an assessment, particularly some of the others in your current profession, were kind enough to say very nice things, and some of them are included in the book, about what the job they thought I'd done as governor.
And a part of that also gave you a national platform, Governor. You had a speech in 1984 that Bill Clinton, in the intro to your book, also references, where you said Democrats need to be compassionate to care, tough enough to govern, which can be true today as it was
That's
back
right.
then.
Absolutely. I mean, regrettably, the Democratic Party, in the minds of many Americans at that point, and perhaps internationally was viewed as being insufficiently patriotic to stand up for their country and to serve in combat, whatever the case may be. But you had the advantage of a party that was clearly well known for its compassion, and you had to have both. And that's what I like to think that I was able to bring together in Virginia, people who wanted to move forward, not cherish the part of the past that was not doing us any good for the future.
So, Governor, a lot of people, after brief stints in politics, end up running for president. You had served as a popular governor of Virginia, your term ending in 1986. For those not familiar, in Virginia, you can only run one term.
That's right.
As governor. 1984 speech, again, to the Democratic Convention, national stage. Why did you choose not to run for president?
Well, that had never been my ultimate objective. And let me just say that I was aware of the fact that I could cure some of the internal divisions in Virginia between those who, again, I don't like to use the terms left and right, but who identified nationally with the Democratic Party. Our credibility on the left was better than our credibility on the right at that point. And I thought the very fact that I had served in the United States Marine Corps on active duty in combat freed me from the automatic assumption that I'm an anti-war person. I'm not pro-war, but I'm not so disposed that I'm going to be against anyone who wants to fight for their rights. So in any event, that was what I thought I could do. I thought by my personal example, I have a defense against those who want to just write me off as being a confirmed leftist. And because of my commitment to civil rights, equal rights, human rights, you couldn't write me off as being anti-social or anti-freedom, anti-liberty, whatever the case may be. So I was uniquely positioned to do just what I wanted to do there. But I realized that doesn't translate automatically into the national level, because there are so many state parties still that are stricken by internal disagreements that and both sides. And I like to think that the book makes an argument for you can't be just with one. I call them tribes. You can't use tribal instincts in this case to cause everybody's got to be X or Y, whatever the case may be. You've got to be able to weigh both sides and come up with a solution in which people can have trust. Then to go back to that word again. In any event, it's something that I didn't feel at that point in my life that I had the all of what would be necessary to basically re-educate the party nationally. I would continue to set the example, but that had not been my objective in the first place. And it would be, there wasn't any point in putting my family through a race that I thought would be difficult, probably more difficult to get a nomination than to win a general election, if that were to come to that. But in any event, it wasn't something I wanted to start into at that stage of my life that I felt was going to be a very difficult aspiration.
Well, you continued your service to Virginia as the senator. And in 1994, you ran a super energized campaign against Oliver North.
Yes. That was an example where I could take on somebody who was, he was already nationally known. In fact, we had some polling at the time, if I recall correctly, that he was better known than the then president of the United States, more easily recognized, and had a following, and yet had an agenda which was quite different from mine. So it was a real challenge. I knew it was going to be a tough race. I knew I was taking on someone who had the popular opinion on his side in many respects, particularly from the Republican side of the aisle. But even there were still a few Democrats that he was certainly charismatic, loved to make speeches and whatever. Knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I still had something to prove to myself, I guess, at that point. And I wanted to. I don't want to get into it's anytime someone is up on the above the horizon in politics, and they get involved with almost any unpopular cause or issues or almost anything else, your popularity can take a nosedive. And I had been through that particular experience, and so I wanted to prove that I still had the trust of the folks, and I thought I could still do a good job. I liked political leadership. I was not a born legislator. It's a very different kettle of fish, if you will. I have great respect for many who have done a superb job as legislators. It is not an easy job necessarily, but for me, ultimately, there was too much time spent by the respective party operatives on both sides trying to create difficult amendments or pieces of legislation that they knew would make it very difficult for their potential opponent in the next election to vote for or against, either way. And so that type of game playing just never appealed to me. Again, I'm not dismissing all legislative experience with that's just the part that I disliked. But I was close enough to it that I could see it evolve, and with, in some cases, with some otherwise very able people, because in some cases it was probably more at the urging of party functionaries in either party saying we've got to do something to absolutely destroy your opponent the next time around, because in many cases they have already cast their lot with somebody on one side or the other, and they want to be able to continue in that role, and they know in part that they're the member of their body who's up for election has to be reelected for them to do that.
So, Governor, part of that experience where you served in the Senate, there is a lot that you can look back and take pride in. I want to highlight the fact that in 1996, you were one of only 14 senators and representing Virginia, which even now is a purple state, let alone back then, to vote against Defense of Marriage Act. Why did you do that?
Okay, you mentioned 14 senators from Virginia. It was 14 senators.
No. 14 You were one of 14 senators out of the 100 to
okay, but I thought you used, forgive me, I thought you used the word of Virginia, from Virginia. I was going to say, we don't have that, we never had that many senators. In any event, I had taken a leading role in that because I felt very strongly that what was described as the Defense of Marriage Act was anything but. It was a desire to discriminate against those who were somehow different. And it was a very easy vote, actually, but it was a very misunderstood issue, and it could be used very effectively by those who were in favor of that act, whether they were really in favor of the act or not, to paint an opponent as being somehow in favor of all these things with which people individually disagreed or were out of favor. In any event, it never occurred to me that someone who was a gung-ho Marine that would be more identified in the long run with that particular legislation. But I'm proud to have had that opportunity. And there's some satisfaction that anyone in a position of leadership gets from being able to take on what they know is a politically unpopular position and convince people that they're on the wrong side of that issue. It's not an easy task. There are a lot of issues that you can't do that with. But this is one I thought was clearly wrong in terms of the way it was presented. And so it was easy to get up and talk against it. In my speech on the floor, the speech against Duma, I try to actually deliver that to the senators and their staffs who were there in the Senate listening to it. I wasn't really trying to project that as a national or international speech at the time, but I knew that I was on the right side of history, if you will, in the long run. And I'm very pleased with what has transpired in that whole area since. I'm constantly reading more and more about it and some of the lives that were that have been different in one way or another, that people couldn't identify with personally, but I present no threat to anybody else and want to live their lives differently. To somehow be against them or feel you have to discriminate against them because it makes you feel better somehow to discriminate against somebody who doesn't believe in all the things that you think are appropriate in life. That just it's indefensible to me to do it. So although I would have been surprised if you told me several years ahead of time that that's something that would be listed on probably on my own obituary eventually, that I would be remembered for that. I'm here to tell you right now, I'm proud that I had that opportunity because I think almost everyone, if they stop and think about it, will realize that what I was saying was right, even though they didn't want to be perceived as being on the wrong side. They didn't want to be identified. And it starts with the example I do give in the book, where while I was, when I was head of the, this was during when I was in law school, I did a summer internship with the JAG Corps in the Marine Corps, Judge Advocate General. And my responsibility as still a Marine officer in the reserves was to be in charge of all of the OQRs, the officer qualification records, of anyone who was accused of any kind of wrongdoing or was suspect in any way in the military justice system. And it was my responsibility to review their OQRs, their officer qualification record book, and make sure that everything was appropriate. And in doing that, I had to read some of the things for which they were in that file. And in many cases, there were things, at least two cases that I think I mentioned them two specifically, not by name, because I don't want to make the rest of their careers difficult, but two officers, I think they happened to be majors in the Marine Corps, who were accused of being homosexuals, not of any conduct, but simply accused. And it was clear to me that citation in their record books was going to result in them not being able to complete their Marine Corps career. If they've stayed in to the time they're a major, they're already destined for the chance if they want to go all the way up. People wonder why I didn't stay in to be commandant of the Marine Corps, and that is the ultimate aspiration of a whole lot of Marines. In any event, it was clear to me that there was real discrimination going to take place, and they were going to be deprived of that opportunity and would probably have to be discharged with a discharge other than honorable for no lack of proper conduct on any occasion, but simply for the feeling that they identified with a particular attraction between the same members of the same genders, whatever the case may be. And I just thought that was fundamentally wrong. So that's where it all got started. The same way in terms of discrimination, when I was in high school at Mount Vernon, it was still before Brown version Board of Education. There, when the school bus, well, I would take to the high school, we would pass through areas here in Northern Virginia that were predominantly Black. We didn't stop and pick up any students. And that I wasn't in a position to do anything about it at that time, but I knew it was wrong. When I finally had an opportunity to do something about it, I could come down squarely against discrimination based on race. And the same thing, any other type of discrimination that isn't based on clear felonious conduct or whatever the case may be, but is based on simply race, origin, or religion, is not what America is really all about.
And that's why, Governor, both as governor and senator, you stood for what you believed in. That's what courage is all about, not doing what is always politically expedient, doing what you believe is right. And that's what you did. And then post your service as governor and senator in 2008, president of a different party, 2004, president of a different party, President Bush, reached out to you in an election year, that February 2004, November would have been election, for you to co-chair the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission. What was that experience like, Governor?
Well, first of all, I was very pleased to be asked to do it because I had been very upfront in terms of my service within the Democratic Party. I had actually specifically declined, as I had in some previous instances, to support a president of the opposite party in taking a particular action. In this case, it was the ill-fated attack on Iraq. And in any event, it was something that he knew politically was taking a real chance. But I think he had enough. We weren't enemies, personal enemies, and I'd always gotten along very well with his father, as a matter of fact. And I respected him, and I appreciated the opportunity. I thought this is an opportunity for me to do something that I believe will be good. I think I have the respect of the military and the intelligence community to conduct a fair investigation. The other co-chair, who was an appellate judge at the federal level at the U.S. Court of Appeals, Larry Silberman, was a Republican. And so we had one of each party, and the president wanted to make it a bipartisan effort. And both Larry and I made it clear, if not by inference and directly, that President Bush at that point said he would not do anything to interfere in any way, in any political sense, nor allow that to take place during that period. And he was a man of his word, coming back to truth. Trust. And the one thing that I was criticized for by a number of Democrats at that point was not specifically assessing personal culpability of the Republican Party and the president at that particular period, because that would, in all likelihood, have cratered his chances for re-election that year. But because I didn't do that, I took a different approach. Now I have to stand up and say, hey, he was a man of his word. And that didn't necessarily mesh with what some of the Democrats wanted me to do at that particular point. In any event, he took a chance on me, I took a chance on him, and it worked out both ways. Going back to trust.
It is, and that's really important, because that trust also helped the commission conclude that the intelligence community was wrong in most of its pre-war judgments and major intelligence failure. So you contributed to the country's understanding moving forward then and there also. Governor, you have a rich experience that you have shared some of it in your book, some of the speeches that you talked about. I would highly encourage people to listen to, whether it's your 1984 speech at the convention, or your speech on the floor of the Senate voting against Defense of Marriage Act. Those are great representations of what courage in leadership is all about. So I would like to know from your perspective, having led such a rich life through the many experiences from Arizona to service in the Marine Corps, at the White House, in Vietnam, back law school, lieutenant governor and governor of Virginia, senator leading the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission. All of this, when you're to give advice to leaders of organizations and leaders across the country, what do you think they should take away from your experience in terms of how they can be leaders that can be respected, as you said, with the kind of courage you have shown throughout your leadership experience?
First of all, let me say I very much appreciate your characterization of my service. It means a lot to me, but they ought to focus on what people are going to think about them after their period of public service is over. Are they going to feel that they had someone that they could believe in, that they could trust? Again, I don't like to sound like a Johnny One Note, but that is a theme that I think is always going to clear your conscience, and whatever you have to do, how unpopular it might be. And we're all going to face, and all do, some unpopular times in our life that we have to speak out against whatever is politically popular or is socially popular for the right reasons. And if you do it for the right reasons, again, that's essentially the advice I give anybody that wants to get into politics. Stick to your guns. Don't be swayed strictly by public opinion. If you believe something's right or wrong, say so, and then be prepared to justify whatever you say. That's, in one form or another, essentially the advice I give anyone that is kind enough to come to me for advice.
Governor Chuck Robb, really appreciate you taking the time to share some of your experience, most especially much respect for the courage you have shown in your own leadership and in guiding so many through sharing of your experience, so we can build on the great things you have done for a better future for our communities and for our country. Thank you so much for joining the conversation, Governor Chuck Robb.
Man, thank you. I very much appreciate the opportunity.